Hello. My name is Rachel. I'm from the Diocese of Connecticut. And I'm part of the programming team. We've been working really hard this past year planning plenary sessions and practice time for you guys, and we hope you're enjoying yourselves. I will be introducing Lene Porter today. She is the Director of Education Experience at the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum. She develops curriculum and other resources that teach the importance of respect, resilience, and responsibility, using the lessons learned from the Oklahoma City bombing. And here's Lene.
Thank you, and I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad that tomorrow you guys are going to be able to experience the Memorial Museum as you go through that tomorrow. On April 19th, 1995, Oklahoma City experienced its worst act of terror, really America's, the worst act of domestic terrorism happened on that day, where a bomb exploded at Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City, and it killed 168 people, including 19 children. And this was done by regular people, just they were Americans, they had been in our military, and they decided that they were angry with the government and had some issues with that. And they felt that the way to solve that conflict was through violence. And they worked together. There was Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, and you'll learn about them tomorrow, and also about two other people, Michael and Lori Fortier. They knew about the bombing. They didn't participate fully, but they knew about it and didn't come forward. So had they come forward, maybe 168 lives would have been saved. So it's so important, if you hear something, to say something that could prevent something like this happening again. It's up to all of us as individuals. But what you'll really learn as you go through the Memorial Museum is about resilience and hope, and how we can get through any tragedy, and that good triumphs over evil every time. And so today you are going to be able to hear from people that actually were impacted by the bombing, hear their stories, so then tomorrow as you go there you can remember their stories, how they felt, how they got through this tragedy, and also see how America helped in this tragedy. Communities all over the world helped, different countries. So and I encourage you to go, when you go back to your families on Friday, to talk to your parents, talk to people about this and what they remember about this day. Since it happened over 22 years ago, most of you were not born at that time, and so ask your parents about that and see what they remember about this. But again, we're here to really teach you about resilience and hope, and again, that good triumphs over evil. So at this time, we will start with our first speaker, and I think you have somebody introducing the first speaker. So again, we are looking for, the whole staff at the Memorial Museum is looking forward to welcoming you tomorrow. And again, stay hydrated and go to bed early tonight.
Hola a todos.
Hello, everyone.
Me llamo Emanuel Almeida y soy de la Diócesis de la República Dominicana.
My name is Emanuel Almeida, and I come from the Diocese of the Dominican Republic.
Y presentaré a Melissa Houston.
I'm here to introduce Melissa Houston.
Melissa Houston sobrevivió al ataque de bomba de Oklahoma City, ocurrido en abril de 1995, y desde el comienzo de su carrera se ha movilizado a favor de iniciativas eficaces para combatir el terrorismo.
As an Oklahoma City bombing survivor, Melissa Houston became an advocate for effective anti-terrorism initiatives early in her career.
Ha trabajado por años en reformar el sistema de justicia penal y ha tenido un papel importante en hallar la verdad en el proceso de sentencias judiciales, sentencias comunitarias y la legislación federal contra el terrorismo.
She has an extensive background in criminal justice reform, and played a key role in reform efforts related to truth in sentencing, community sentencing, and federal anti-terrorism legislation.
Antes de ser la comisionada de trabajo de Oklahoma, Melissa fungió como jefa de gabinete de la Fiscalía General de Oklahoma y de la Oficina Local de Seguridad Nacional, y hoy es miembro de la mesa directiva de la Fundación Conmemorativa Nacional de la Ciudad de Oklahoma.
Prior to becoming Oklahoma's Commissioner of Labor, Houston served as Chief of Staff at the Oklahoma Attorney General's Office and the Oklahoma Office of Homeland Security. Today, she is on the board of the Oklahoma City National Memorial Foundation.
Ella es Melissa Houston.
She is Melissa Houston.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, but most of all, I appreciate your willingness to hear our story and to go to the memorial tomorrow and to learn our story and hopefully to carry that on and carry it with you throughout your life and continue to share our story of what happened here. So my role is to talk to you a little bit about my perspective on the bombing before you have the opportunity to go to the memorial tomorrow, and you'll hear some other perspectives. And that's really part of the lesson of the memorial, is how many different types of people were impacted and how they were impacted in so many different types of ways. So for me, even now it's been 22 years, and even today it impacts me. So 22 years ago, I had just graduated from law school, and I was starting my very first big girl job. I was hired on January 19th, 1995, to work as a staff attorney for a sentencing commission. And at the time, I was so young and so full of life and innocent and excited, waiting for, was that cute boy going to call tomorrow? Probably like many of you. And all of that was really changed in an instant. So on April 19th, I was at work, and I was working on sentencing reform. And so part of my job as an attorney was, I had a really boring job at the time. I had to read the criminal statutes. And if you've ever read law books, don't let me discourage anyone from going to law school. It's an incredible opportunity. But when you're a baby lawyer, you get to do kind of the drudgery. So at the time, I was sitting at my desk, and I was reading really boring law books, really boring criminal statutes. And I don't know about you, I mean, you're all in school, but you know how sometimes you kind of cut a little deal with yourself when you have something drudgery that you need to do, where it's, okay, I'll do this for 10 minutes, and then I'll go look at Facebook. Or I'll do this for 5 minutes, and then I'll go take a walk, or whatever it is, right? You kind of cut that deal with yourself. So that's what I had done. So I was trying to get through the book, and at 9 o'clock, I said, okay, I'm gonna finish the task that I have in front of me, and at 9 o'clock, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna go get a Coke. And so I'm sitting at my desk, and I'm going through the statutes, and at 9 o'clock, I look at my watch, and I say, oh, okay, well, it's time for me to go get my Coke. And I stand up, and I'm getting ready to leave, and the guy in the office behind me started talking to me. And at the time, I was so annoyed, so annoyed. I've sat here for 30 minutes. I've done my work that I'm supposed to do. It's time for me to take a break, and this guy won't shut up. Completely annoyed, and he was reading something to me that I could have cared less about, and that's when it happened. Probably saved my life. And I always try and remember that. When things happen that aren't what you expect and maybe don't fit into your plan, it probably saved my life. So people ask me, did I hear it? I actually didn't. It turns out when you are that close to a bomb when it goes off, you can't hear it. You can feel it. And so the very first indication that I had was that my hair stood straight up. The force of the blast blew my hair off my head. And I thought, what is that? What is this? And then the ceiling fell in, and then the walls fell in, and then you could smell the ceiling tiles and the diesel fuel and hear people screaming, and had no sense of what had happened. People talk about they think it was a natural gas explosion or something else going on, and for me, I just felt evil. I just felt a sense of evil. And it was really scary to have something like that happen and not really know what's happening and why and what to do about it. I hadn't spent a lot of time. I had only been on my job about 3 months, and so I hadn't spent a lot of time doing things like fire drills. So I didn't really know how to get out of the building, because the only time I'd ever gotten in and out of the building was through an elevator. Well, when you go through a bombing, you don't have elevators. It looked like a giant monster had punched through the middle of the elevator, sucking in the doors. And we didn't really have walls, and you had debris, and so the building was filled with smoke. And I remember hearing one of my coworkers just screaming for help, and it was because she had taken the window to her face, and she'd taken all the glass to her face and to her eyes, and so she couldn't see. She'd taken the window frame to her head. And so trying to figure out how to get help and how to get out, and in an instant, my whole life was changed. So I had a really hard time getting out of the building, which is something that I still deal with today. I'm one of those people who always knows where an exit is at any time on a building. I had a really hard time getting out, and I got out, and we actually didn't have anyone in our building. Tomorrow when you go to the building, I actually was in the building that the museum is in. So right above the survivor tree, you will see a phrase written by the rescue workers, and there are 2-story arched windows, and that's where my office was. So I was on the south side of the building on the 3rd floor. And you'll see that tomorrow when you go. And the firefighters and the EMT, I mean, they were very busy with the Murrah building, obviously. And so in our building, actually, we all ended up helping each other out. We actually had a homeless shelter across the street where we had a lot of homeless people who came and helped people to get out of my building. So I stood on the corner and tried to figure out what to do, and talking to my coworker, and I walked away. I was the only one in my office who didn't go to the hospital. I was the only one not injured physically. And so as everyone went off to the hospital, I didn't really know what to do with myself. I had my purse. That's one of the things you really don't know kind of how these things happen, but I remember my coworker getting a briefcase, and I somehow had my purse. So I went to the parking garage, and I found my car, and as I went through the parking garage, I mean, all the cars are twisted and the windows are gone, but for whatever reason, my car was okay, and I drove home. I don't still to this day remember all the drive. I remember that I was scared to drive over bridges because I thought they would collapse. And so it took me a long time to get home, and I got home, and watching the coverage, and still, I mean, we didn't know what had happened or why at that point. And so I was that way, and I would talk to people. I mean, you would see me, and you would think I was totally normal. Turns out I was in shock. My grandfather, who's a World War II vet, actually came in town and said she has shell shock, which is we call PTSD today. So I was that way for about 3 days and carrying on conversations. And then all of a sudden, I remember watching footage on TV, and it was of a child who had been cut, and he was carried out by somebody in a journal record outfit, and I realized that the cameraman was standing next to me, and that what I was seeing on TV, I had seen with my own eyes. And that's when kind of the final wave of the bomb hit me, kind of the final percussion of the bomb. So, and then I entered about the darkest place that any person can ever go. And something you wouldn't wish on anyone. I had no hope. I had no faith. And I really didn't want to be alive. And so it was a bad place. It was a bad place to be for a while. Obviously, I'm not there anymore. So how did I come back from that? Well, it was a couple things. First of all, I decided to be of use in some way. And so I got involved with a group of family members and survivors who worked on legislation. And we worked on the very first anti-terrorism bill that ever passed. It's called the Effective Death Penalty Appeals and Anti-Terrorism Act. And it was passed in 1996. We got together with the families of Pan Am 103, who were the only other terrorist victims at that point. And we passed legislation. And let me tell you, the far, far right hated this bill. And the far, far left hated this bill. And do you know what that means? It means it's a good bill. Okay? I'll just tell you that. The other thing that helped me was my faith. And when I tell my story, sometimes I don't tell this part because, we live in such a secular society these days, right? That you have to be careful about sharing about Jesus wherever you go, right? But I think I'm pretty safe in this crowd. So my faith is very important to me. And at the time, I wasn't really a churchgoer, and I was young and, had gotten out of college and all that, and I wasn't really a person of great faith, and I was in a really dark place and didn't really have any faith because I didn't have any hope and didn't see the point of all of it. And my mom knew a priest, a Catholic priest, and he had known my grandmother. It's a long story how she knows him, but the short version is that she wanted me to go speak to him. My mom was desperate. I mean, she sent me to counselors and shrinks and everybody that she could think of to help me, and so she sent me to see this priest. And I don't know what it is about this man, but he had the most faith of anybody I've ever witnessed. And I remember pouring my heart out to him, and for some reason I just felt that I could trust him, and I could tell him how dark my heart was and how dark my soul was. And he didn't judge me, and he listened. And do you know what he said? I said, I can't go to church. I don't believe. I don't have faith. And he said, that's okay. You know why? Because I have faith. And I have faith enough for both of us. And I know God, and I know that he will find his way back into your heart. That's how much faith I have. And so he encouraged me to go to church. That's what we do as Catholics. We make everybody get in the pews at least once a week. It's very effective. But he said, go to church. And I don't know if it'll take a week, and I don't know if it'll take a month. I don't know if it'll take 5 years. But I have faith enough that I know God will find his way into your heart. And he did. So that's how I found my faith back. Yeah, you can applaud that. It's a work of the Lord. So I'll end with 3 lessons. I made a promise to myself that whenever I spoke about my story, that I would always share the 3 things that I've learned. People always ask, what you've learned, and my faith is very important, but there's 3 things that I've always learned that I like to pass on to audiences that I speak to. The first lesson is to be aware. To be aware. For me, that means being aware of exits are, okay? Like I need to know how to get out of a building. Fire drills and things like that are actually good. Unfortunately, in our society, it also means be aware of things that are going on. If you saw somebody walking down the street in Oklahoma City right now wearing a backpack and a winter coat and a parka, that's not normal. You need to see something, you say something. We have to be aware. If you see somebody down, you see somebody who's a loner, unfortunately we have school shootings, you need to be aware, right? So be aware. The second lesson is to be of use. To be of use. There are 168 people who are no longer able to be on this planet and to do their work. And it is our obligation as survivors and our obligation of people who are here to be of use. To be the best daughter we can be, or the best son we can be, or parent, or student, or church member, to be of use, to be the hands and feet of God on this planet. Be of use. That honors their memory. And the final thing, my final lesson, is to be grateful. And so let me tell you, one of the most powerful stories that I share quite a bit is about the power of gratitude. And so I told you that I was in a very dark place, right? And had nothing to be grateful for, not even faith. Well, my mom, God love my mom. My mom at the time had been watching a show called Oprah Winfrey, which I know y'all probably know who Oprah is. Yeah. You're probably too young to remember when she actually had a show, but that's okay. Oprah had this show, and she had a guest on that was shilling a book. And it was called a gratitude journal. And so my mom, who's grasping at straws to help me, brings home this gratitude journal, and she's so proud of it. And the concept of the gratitude journal was that every day you had to write down 5 things that you're grateful for. 5 things. Well, I thought this was about the stupidest thing that you could give to somebody who wasn't grateful for anything. And I wasn't. And it was hard. I mean, think about it. When you're in a bad mood, it's kind of hard to be grateful for anything, right? Well, magnify that. And where I wasn't even grateful to be alive. So it was hard to come up with something that I was grateful for. And you know what it was? The first thing I came up with? Chocolate. Chocolate. I was grateful for chocolate. And then I was grateful for Sweet Tarts, and then Three Musketeers, and then Smarties, and it was candy. A lot of candy. There's a couple months there of candy throughout my gratitude journal. But the concept was each day it had to be different, right? So I had to go around and think of what am I going to put in this stupid journal each night? And so I would walk around and I would say, well, that sky's blue, that's kind of pretty. I'm grateful for color. I'm grateful for the color blue. Well, that flower's pretty, the crepe myrtle against the summer sky. I'm grateful for flowers. And as I started to live my life looking for the things that I was grateful for, it amazingly changes your attitude in how you perceive the world around you. And so even today, I have 2 young sons who produce more laundry than I don't know how. They look at it and it's dirty. I mean, it's laundry everywhere. And I'm frustrated and I can't believe I have to do laundry again and this is crazy. And I will stop and think, I'm grateful that I have a washer, right? I'm grateful that I have clothes. I'm grateful that I have people that wear these clothes. I'm grateful that I love these people who wear these clothes. And it changes your attitude from drudgery to gratitude. It's a very, very powerful tool. So that's my story. Thank you for letting me share it. I appreciate you. Thank you. Whew.
Hello, I'm Chun Yang Vang from the Episcopal Church in Minnesota. I'm here today to introduce Reverend Wendy Lambert. She was a physical therapist working with elderly patients in western Oklahoma when the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was bombed. Today, she is executive pastor at St. Luke's United Methodist Church, located just a few blocks north of the bombing sites. The church responded significantly on April 19, 1995, and the days following, providing food and shelter for the first responders, as well as assistance in a variety of other areas.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for coming to Oklahoma. I hope the weather has been kind and will continue to be kind to all of you. It can get hotter, so actually, I'm glad that it's where it's at. Back on April 19th, 1995, I was a physical therapist in western Oklahoma, and I had arrived to work early. I had already seen several patients, and I remember walking down one of the hallways, and you know how it is in a hospital or a rehab center, the patient rooms are situated opposite one another. So when you walk down a hallway, there are pairs of rooms, pairs of doorways. And so as I was walking down the hallway, I passed the first set of doorways, and out of my peripheral vision, I noticed something out of place on the television. I didn't stop to look, but I just had that feeling that something was out of place. Well, I passed the next set of rooms, and again, I picked up that something wasn't quite right. By the third set of rooms, I stopped because I could tell that all of the television sets in the facility were showing the same kind of footage, and that was that there had been some kind of explosion in downtown Oklahoma City. Now, I didn't know anybody that worked or lived in Oklahoma City at that time, and I didn't understand what had happened. They didn't understand at that time what had happened, but immediately I felt a pull. The news reporters at the very first were starting to say that they needed doctors and nurses for what would surely produce a high number of casualties. But I was a physical therapist. Some physical therapists are trained in kind of that immediate first aid, but I wasn't. I was in long-term rehabilitation. And yet, from the very beginning, I felt something deep within me that was calling me to Oklahoma City. For me, I felt very strongly that that was God calling me. It didn't make any sense, and it wasn't a real warm and fuzzy feeling. It was actually really off-putting. I felt that God was calling me to come to Oklahoma City, and I couldn't wrap my head around that. It didn't make any kind of sense. So I went to my other friends that worked with me, other physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, and I told them what I was struggling with. And these were all dear friends of mine. They were all Christians, and so I felt like they would understand. And I told them, I feel God is calling me to go to Oklahoma City and help out in some way. And they told me, Wendy, that's crazy. There's nothing you can do. You're not a nurse, you're not a doctor. God is not calling you. And so when your friends tell you that, it kind of sets you back, but yet that feeling didn't go away. And so I called my boss. She worked in Oklahoma City, and she oversaw the rehabilitation facility that we were working with. And she was on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, so she was a little bit more familiar with what was going on. And I told her, I feel like God is calling me to come help out in some way. And she said pretty much the same thing. That doesn't make any sense. You won't be of help. They need doctors, they need nurses. They don't need you. That doesn't make any sense. So I hung up the phone, and I had one of those moments, kind of you're at the crossroads. For me, I could listen to all of these rational, reasonable people who were dear in my life, but I knew that it wouldn't stop that feeling inside of me. I knew that it wasn't going to go away until I answered it. And so even though all these people that I respected and admired said something else, I felt this strange turmoil that I knew wouldn't go away until I answered it. And so I finished up my patience, and I got in my car, and I drove to Oklahoma City. I listened on the radio because I wasn't even familiar with where everything was in the city, and on the radio station, they were saying that if you've come to volunteer, you need to head to the Red Cross building. And so I found my way to the Red Cross building, and when I got there, there were people everywhere. There was a person in front of the Red Cross building with a speaker saying that if you've come to volunteer, make your way to the front and sign up on the registration sheets, and we'll call you in the weeks to come. That's how many people had showed up. A lady who worked at the Red Cross in those days is a part of our church, and she would later tell me that over 4,000 people volunteered with the Red Cross building that day. And so I show up and I see all these hundreds and hundreds of people, and I start questioning, why am I here? Did I make this up? I make my way to the front, and I get out the clipboard that had all the registration sheets, and I flip to the very last one, and I put all my contact information, and I turn around and I see all the people, and I thought, I don't know what happened. Obviously, I just made this up in my head, and I thought, what kind of person am I that conjured up this sense that I needed to come and help out? Obviously, I was completely wrong. And so I started to walk back to my car, and I got right to the curb, and at that moment, a minivan pulls up right in front of me, and they open up the door, and I don't know who was inside. I suspect people who were associated with Red Cross, but they opened up their sliding door, and they looked at me and these hundreds and hundreds of people standing there, and they asked me, "We're going downtown. Do you want to go with us and assist?" So I said yes. And I thought, okay, I'm supposed to be here. This is right. So I get in the van, and we start heading to downtown Oklahoma City. But it was about the moment that they were thinking that there might be a second bomb. And they were evacuating everybody from downtown Oklahoma City behind a barricade. So we were prevented from going any farther, and we had to stop there because they were worried about another explosion. And so as many people had been at the Red Cross building, it seemed like there was even more at this barricade area. And there was law enforcement officers there prohibiting anybody from going farther. And so again, I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Did I just make this up? And I thought, obviously, this is the end of the road. I'm going to walk back to my car. And at just that moment, there was a physician standing next to me, and he looked at me and this person next to me, and in all those hundreds and hundreds of people, he said, "I need an assistant to come with me downtown to the bombing site. Would you accompany me?" And so I said yes. And we walked the rest of the way down to the edge of the building. I stood at the southwest corner, and he kind of disappeared into the building, and I don't know that I saw him again. But by that time, I thought, I'm supposed to be here. I knew something was going to happen. I knew that God was going to use me in some way, and so I waited and waited there. And while I was waiting for my moment to help out in some way, I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew, I was confident that God had brought me. So I looked around. There's the courthouse on the opposite side of the Murrah building, and all the windows were blown out, and these thick, black, government-style curtains were blowing through the window, and it was just one of those very strange images that kind of imprint on your mind. I remember papers and debris just floating in the air everywhere, and I think one of the things that was most unsettling to my senses was the fact that everywhere you looked, you saw devastation. It's like if you were watching a movie and everything was violence. There was debris, there was rubble, there was so many injuries. Everything was turmoil. Imagine seeing that in a movie without a soundtrack. So here I was in this scene of violence, and everything seems like it should be loud, and it was quiet. And it was so surreal to have this image of loud violence and this stillness, this quiet surrounding you. As I was watching, I saw people showing up and doing what they could to help out. It became cold and kind of wet, and so one group came around and passed out rain jackets and rain pants. Oklahoma Natural Gas came around and passed out hard hats for everyone. I remember a man brought around sandwiches, and I don't remember what type of sandwich it was, but I could fold a sandwich in foil the same way today because I remember it that well. There was a woman who brought around little styrofoam cups of coffee. All these people were present. There were already first responders there trying to rescue, take care of the scene. So many people there doing what they could in any way to bring about help and assistance. So I knew that I was going to get to help, or God was going to use me in some way. I waited hours. And finally, when evening came and night started to arrive, as strong as I felt pulled by God to be there in that moment, all of a sudden I felt God tell me it's time to go. I can't tell you how frustrating that was. Because in that moment, I thought, I answered your call. I did what you asked. Why are you sending me home? I had been brought here, I answered it, and nothing? I was here just to stand here? But I can tell you it was that strong. Not always when God speaks to us are we able to fully understand. And so sometimes how God speaks to us can be unsettling because we don't quite see it all yet. Well, I knew that God had sent me on, and so I started walking back to my car, and by this time I was weeping just at the utter senselessness, the devastation of it all. And I get in my car and I start driving home. I'm on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, and my phone rings, and it was my mother. And she said that my father had had an appointment in the Social Security office of the Murrah building that morning. And he had been there at 9 a.m., and they hadn't heard from him. And in that moment, I knew that my father had lost his life that day. And so I turned around, and from that moment on, especially that first night, I really don't remember much. I don't know how I made it to the church, but we were directed to a church building where some of the family members were gathering that very first night. And even though my family held out incredible hope, I knew deep inside that I had been given a glimpse of something, and God had already let me know that my father had passed away. And yet I walk into the church building, and there are brick walls, and I remember white sheets of paper with all of the names of the missing on these sheets of paper. And so we went up to the wall and we found my father's name. It would be just a few years ago, I was speaking at the memorial, and I was telling the group of people that I had come to this church, and I couldn't remember what church it was. And they told me, well, it was St. Luke's. It's the church that I was appointed to just a few years ago. And so you want to get a glimpse of how God works in the world. I was at St. Luke's years before I ever came to serve at St. Luke's. And that very first night, the people in the ministries of St. Luke's were ministering to my family before they ever knew me. That's what we do as the church, right? Well, after that first night, the next day, we were sent to an official family center. It was at the Disciples of Christ Church. And I started to witness all the ways that people were helping there. As you went in, the National Guard was protecting the sanctity of this site. They weren't letting any press or any reporters in, so the families could be left alone. Although I always have to put in a little caveat that of all the press that I dealt with throughout this ordeal, I found that they were extremely respectful and kind. We sometimes give the press a bad name, but I can tell you from my own experience, I found nothing but grace and kindness that entire experience. Well, in the family center, they had 8-foot tables, like at high school, those long 8-foot tables, surrounding the entire room, and they were always covered with food. And that was because local restaurants were donating food all day long, through the night, 24 hours a day, for all the time that the families were there waiting to hear word. The Daily Oklahoman, our newspaper, would send over pallets of newspapers for the families who were waiting on some kind of word. There were therapy animals. There were stuffed animals for the children. There were movies that the children could watch. All these different ways that individuals and groups could help out, they all pitched in. I would find out later that there was a similar place for all the first responders who had come from all over the country to assist. There were cots where they could catch some amount of sleep. There were stacks of fresh clothes, because the first responders were the ones who had to operate in some of the worst conditions and see things that nobody should ever have to see. So all through this experience, I kept seeing over and over ministry and kindness from people. One of the most touching things that always gets me is the fact that the medical examiner's office did everything they could so that family members did not have to identify their loved ones. Now, I was a physical therapist. I was the oldest child, and I had already made the decision that it made the most sense that when it came time, I would be the one to identify my father's body. I thought that that was my role. I would spare my mother and my brothers. I had a medical background, so it absolutely made the most sense. I had made that decision, and it never came to that, because the medical examiner's office had done all this research to spare my family. Now, I want you to think, Oklahoma City, thank goodness, doesn't have a lot of cases that hit the medical examiner's office. When you have something of this magnitude, they were working around the clock, and just everybody was putting this incredible pressure on them. It would have been so easy for them to call in family members to identify where that could be possible. But in my father's case, it meant that because we had moved here from Ohio, go Buckeyes, my father hadn't gone to the dentist or the doctor here in Oklahoma. And so they had to go back years and across state lines because they wanted to spare my family the trauma of seeing our loved one like that. That's how God works in our lives. God inspires us to kindness. Now, all these years later, I recognize and I firmly believe that God had called me there that day. And I was to be there not to accomplish any task. I wasn't to help rescue or clean up. I was there to be a witness, because I believe that what God calls me to do is to share a story. I want to share about how God loves us, and God loves in us and through us to make a difference in this world. Violence is never more powerful than the kindness that we can exhibit. I can tell you that for the rest of my life, I will remember a little styrofoam cup of coffee because one woman made the decision to answer the call of God and do something. For as much as I wrestled with coming downtown, I can only imagine she was thinking, well, what can I do, God? I guess I could bring some coffee. Her yes will stay with me till the day I die. We are a greater force for good in the world, and there's nothing that can stand up against the love of God, and that's what we're called to bring. I'm so excited that you've come here to talk about peace, because peace is what the world needs today. And so I hope that, first of all, stay in love with God. Stay in love with God, because when you stay in love with God, you stay close to God. God isn't up in heaven way off somewhere and we have to beg God to be at work in the world. God's already at work in the world, and we get the honor and the privilege of partnering with God. And so if we stay in love with God through reading God's word, through being involved in worship, through mission, through fellowship, if we stay in love with God, we'll recognize where God is at. We'll hear God's voice in our lives, and we'll know where we can join with God to make a difference. Second, be intentional about kindness. Please don't wait for some act of violence and then respond. That's too late. That's it only brings you up to a neutral place. Be intentional about kindness now, every day. There was a man who joined our church about 4 years ago, and we always ask people, why did you join St. Luke's? We're so glad you did. And he said, because you guys smile and tell me hi. That's the bar in the world today. People aren't acknowledged. People aren't shown that they matter. So do you hear what kind of kindness I'm putting before you? Smile at people, tell them hello. That's what kindness is in the world today. Don't turn away, be brave. Take the initiative and be intentional about kindness. And then third, I'm so glad to have followed her and her words about gratitude. Live in gratitude. One of my favorite quotes in life is, silent gratitude is of no use to anyone. Silent gratitude is of no use to anyone. It's no good for you just to feel kind of warm and thankful inside. Write it down in a journal. Give thanks to God and tell people that you are grateful for the difference they make in your lives. Express your gratitude. Let people know that they matter. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to God, to one another, and to a world who needs exactly what you can bring. Thank you.
Hello, I am Avery, and I'm from the Diocese of Massachusetts. And I am on the program team. I have the honor today of introducing Chief Hansen. Chief Hansen has over 29 years' experience with the Oklahoma City Fire Department and is the current Battalion Chief of Operations for the OKCFD. He rose to the ranks of suppression, having been a hazmat station officer and District Chief 603B. He is an EMTD, EMS instructor, hazmat technician and instructor, DEA certified in clandestine lab operations, and a member of the Critical Incident Stress Management Team. He has responded to several critical incidents that include the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, the World Trade Center attacks, the May 3rd, 1999 tornado, the 2013 Moore Oklahoma City tornado, Hurricane Gustav, and the national security event in Oklahoma City with the NBA Finals.
Thank you, Avery, and thank you for having me here. This is hard to follow. There's three lovely and articulate ladies, so I'm going to try my best. Yes, I'm Larry Hanson, the Battalion Chief of Operations for the Oklahoma City Fire Department, as Avery said. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the response that day, 22 years ago, April 19, 1995. It was a beautiful spring day, not near as hot as it is today. But, everybody was doing what they normally do. People were going to work. I had actually just came off shift, so I was at home about 15 miles north of downtown. My current assignment then was I was the rescue squad driver at Station 21, which was one of our busiest fire stations in Oklahoma City. The way we work is we work 24-hour shifts, and then we're off for 24 hours. So we do that for 3 days, or 3 shifts, and then you're off 4 days. So I was in between shifts and I was at home when I heard this loud bang on my roof. I didn't know what it was, obviously, because I was in bed taking a nap after a pretty busy shift. Then the phone started ringing, and my mom, was working at St. Anthony's Hospital, which was very close, just a few blocks from the Murrah building, and she said, "Larry, there was a loud explosion, and now there's smoke in the hospital." And I said, "Well, why are you calling me? You need to get out of the hospital, and then you can call me." But so I told her, call the fire department. So I turned on my scanner, which we all had scanners in because we didn't have the technology, the 800 megahertz radios that we have now. So we all had scanners, and I turned mine on, and there was all this noise going on. I could hear the chiefs talking, and there was a lot of radio traffic, so I knew something pretty catastrophic had happened and pretty intense. And I heard our fire chief, Gary Mars at the time, ask for a general alarm. General alarm meant all hands on deck. We had never had a general alarm in the history of Oklahoma City Fire Department. So I knew at that time it was pretty serious. They were talking about different buildings that had been impacted and there was an explosion. At that time, like Melissa said, they thought it was a natural gas explosion. They didn't know what it was. But that was the preferred thought, because nobody would think that downtown Oklahoma City we would have an intentional act of terrorism. And so I met some of my station members at Station 21, got our bunker gear, and we went straight to the site. We got there about 9:45 that morning. We got in, we were assigned to a rescue group. We went in when you go tomorrow, you'll tour the grounds and you'll see where on the western side of the entrance is the parking garage. So we made our way through the parking garage, and you could already tell that it was pretty catastrophic and it was going to be a long incident. There was fatalities there. There was a lot of groups working, a lot of chaos, and a lot of people being busy and just working and trying to do the best for who survived and trying to get the people out. And at that time, we didn't know the impact of how many people had lost their lives and how many people were injured. And as you've heard, we had 168 fatalities, 19 children, and over 500 that were injured in the Murrah building and the surrounding areas. And so, obviously, that was the largest incident that we had ever made. And it takes a toll on you. So that first day I worked till 10 o'clock that night, and as I left, I was thinking, okay, I hadn't got a hold of my family because you couldn't get any cell phones. Back then we had, if you remembers, you kids won't remember, but we had bag phone, and so you couldn't get any cell service out because everything was jammed because everybody was trying to get a hold of their families. And so I saw one of the firefighters as I was leaving, and he said, "Hey, I talked to your wife earlier." And I said, "Well, I'm glad you did, because I haven't got to talk to her all day to let her know I'm okay." And he said, "Well, she did a really neat thing. She had called which was, it's now the Chase Bank, but it was the Liberty Bank building then, and she had called the manager and somehow got a hold of the manager, but had the lights turned on as a cross. And every year before that, we always got joy at Christmas time because they always lit up the Liberty Bank building with the sign of the cross. And so somehow she had that done, and for this day, I still think that was one of the most reassuring and comforting things to me. But as the days went on, the next day I was on shift and I worked down there 12 hours. I was assigned over the 17 days various assignments, and it was tough. I mean, it was tough, and I don't want to be graphic in any of the details, but there was a lot of things that we did that you touched, you smelled, you saw, that you don't expect that in your career. And we deal with a lot of different emergencies, but this was a very tough one. And one of the things that came out of this incident was that was so catastrophic, but we had so much help. And that's the thing when I talk and do the first person talks at the memorial and talk to younger groups. So I talk about good triumphing over evil. And what I mean by that is it was such a difficult task, those 17 days. But everything that we needed, when the media put out that the rescue workers, they need coveralls because their bunker gear is too cumbersome and too heavy. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, there'd be trucks pulling up with coveralls, and the same way with leather boots and knee pads. Anything you wanted or needed was provided. It was like the whole city and the nation opened up their hearts and their wallets to help us, and that was so humbling. And it meant a lot to us because we were down there doing what we're trained to do, and we're doing our job. And yet, people that had lost so much and had suffered so much were the ones that were doing whatever they could to help us. And so that's the story that I like to tell. And I talk about how the city came together, and during that time, our crime rate actually went down. It was like the whole city said, we're going to give you a break. We know you're working. And what I mean by that, I mean law enforcement, the firefighters, the EMS, all the call volume went down in the city. There weren't as many fires that 17 days. There weren't as many medical calls. Like I said, the crime rate went down. And so, and did we do it by ourselves? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We had so much help. We had help from all across the country. Early on, they declared a state of emergency, the governor did, and so we were starting to get resources. We got in FEMA teams from all over, some of the urban search and rescue teams, and they brought in technology that we'd never seen before. But we got to work hand in hand with them, and we worked with one of the task force was from New York Fire Department New York, and you start building relationships when you were working, and Ray Downey was their special operations chief. He came to Oklahoma City and was in charge of their task force. Well, he was one of the members on 9/11 that lost his life in the World Trade Center. And there was 10 firefighters from Fire Department New York that helped us during our bombing that lost their lives in the World Trade Center. So I was able to go up to New York for two weeks and work at the World Trade Center, and the magnitude, as horrific and as our bombing was, when we went to New York, everything was so much bigger. But the work was the same. The work was the same. Here, we worked with 5-gallon buckets. We wanted to be as careful as we could. We wanted to take apart the building because we had that debris pile. We had the pancake collapse of nine floors. So you literally had to dig by hand to take out rock by rock, rebar by rebar, had to get it all out in order to recover the victims. And also, we never wanted to give up, and this is part of the rescue that we found it hard as responders, is going from that phase from rescue to recovery, because we didn't want to admit that there's nobody else coming out of that building alive, and that was tough. And And as a community, the community rallied around us, and as we would, you know, we'd go for our shifts, and there would actually be family members and civilians and citizens along the gates of the street, you know, applauding the firefighters and giving them words of encouragement as they were going to work, and other rescue workers. It was very humbling because they'd lost so much, and yet we had all the equipment and all the training to go in, but yet these people that had lost everything and had nothing were willing to give you everything they had just to help you. And so that's the story I like to tell. We call it the Oklahoma Standard. And one night I was working in the command post, and it was my job to notify the governor's office every time we found a victim. So I'd made a few phone calls, and then it was about 4 in the morning, and then I got a call that one of the task force was getting ready to leave. So they wanted me to call the fire chief and have him come down there. So at that point in time in my career, I never talked to the fire chief. It'd be bad if you talked to the fire chief. So I have to call the fire chief at home and say, Chief Mars, and of course he's asleep, you know. And I said, you got to come down here. The Virginia Task Force wants to, they're leaving and they want to talk to you. So he grumbles around, but he comes in. And all they wanted was, they wanted to thank him. And one of them actually had $1 and said, this $1 is the one I came with. I came with $1 and I'm leaving with $1. And I'm sure he came with more, but the symbolism was that he didn't have to take anything out of his pocket while he was here, because the citizens of the community had paid for everything and made sure that they were well taken care of. And so that's the story when you talk about, and Wendy talked about it, you know, good triumphing over evil. Absolutely. And the Oklahoma Standard, and I wear this band here, and it's part of it talks about the Oklahoma Standard, and it talks about service, honor, and kindness. And I would encourage you, when you get time, to Google the Oklahoma Standard and look at the museum and the memorial, and you can actually sign up and be committed to that Oklahoma Standard. Because this week you're all Oklahomans, right? Absolutely. So I think our message tonight is, yes, bad things happen to good people, but good people always win out. Good people always rise above and take care of each other. And that's our job as citizens and as humans, to take care of each other. And I think Melissa said it well. If you see something, say something. That's the world we live in now. So every day is a gift, not a given. So just make sure that you live life to the fullest. You watch out for each other and you love one another. And God is good. Thank you. And with that, I think we're done. And we very, very much appreciate, we're very humbled and honored that you had us here tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Let us thank Lynn Porter, Melissa McLaughlin Houston, Reverend Wendy Lambert, and Chief Larry Hanson again for sharing their wonderful stories. My name is Randy Callender from the Diocese of Maryland. And I am one of the chaplains for the EYE planning team. And so before I close us out with prayer, I just want to say, just as Bronwyn mentioned that she's not your mother, I am not your father. But please do as Bronwyn said. And so what time are the doors open? 8:30. And what time are you in their seats with your diocese? 9. And don't forget your water bottles, t-shirts, and all the things that you need for the 12-hour trip. Let us pray. Peace, be still, and know that I am God. Holy and loving God, we give you thanks for your light being with us in this sacred space at this time. We give you thanks for the stories that we just heard and for the ears that have listened to them. God, we ask that your light just continue to be with us, that we continue to feel your love around us, your hands holding us, and see your light shining before us as we walk on this path to peace. God, peace is also possible in the midst of tragedy, and help us to see that through your light and your love. Now watch over us on this night, for many of us may have questions. Many of us may be dealing with a lot of emotions. And God, we ask that you just hear us as we call upon you, O great Creator, and we lift our voices up to you. Bless us now and forevermore. Through Jesus Christ we pray and say, Amen.